In today's episode, I speak with the wonderful Lou LeBentz. Lou is the founder of the online trauma recovery program, The Voyage. Lou is also a trauma specialist, psychotherapist, speaker, and mental health campaigner. Maybe leave some stuff for somebody else to do, you know? How are you, Lou?
I know, it's greedy, doesn't it? Wanting to do all those things at once. Yeah.
Well,
Sorry
from what I
about
hear,
that.
you achieve it very well.
Well, most of it, some of it, I think I would like to do more of. So I'm putting it there and I'm putting it out there because maybe if it comes after my name, it might be things that I can walk into a bit more, like the campaigning side. And the speaking side, really. So I think those are on the wish list, let's say.
You're such a great speaker, though. I mean, I've watched a few things that you've done online, and you just have a very, I suppose, compassionate way of articulating things that can often be misconstrued or complex, or, you know, sometimes you get people that, unfortunately, their objective might be to convince you they're really clever, and they don't use very helpful terms, but you do. And I appreciate it.
Thank you. That's really touching, but I definitely don't feel that I'm very clever. Let's start there. No, yeah, I mean my O-level and GCSE results would, give rise to that fact. So I think it's about trying to make complex things as easy to digest as possible. And it's funny about the speaking, isn't it? Because I often feel that we are drawn towards our greatest fears and to overcome our greatest fears. And of course, I was terribly glossophobic. So I had a terrible fear of public speaking for years.
Wow. I mean, that was a perfect example of why I said we're drawn towards what we fear. I had this quote the other day, and it said, the freedom that you are looking for is often found in the thing that you were avoiding. And I loved that quote because, unfortunately, I found it to be true many, many times.
Me too. Absolutely, me too. Yeah, couldn't have said it better.
Yeah,
So thank you, because speaking and campaigning and having a voice and being out there, I don't think comes easy to a few of us or many of us that are in the field.
you have to have passion. I think it does get really hard, right? And that self-doubt doesn't, no one gets away with that. As confident as somebody might look, you don't know what happened 5 minutes before they stepped out. I've known people, matter of fact, I was speaking at something recently, and somebody whom I've put on a pedestal, my thing, I did that to them. And 2 minutes before, they're having a panic attack. And I'm talking to them and trying to calm them down. I'm like, this is mental. What's happening? But this is how things can go, right? You never judge a book by its cover. But I feel like we should start at the beginning. Can you introduce yourself to the people that might not have come across you yet, and just tell people a bit about yourself?
Okay, God, I don't want to start at the very beginning because
start wherever you like.
I'll go recent and then we can go back. So currently, I'm Lou LeBentz, and currently I'm still a therapist. So I am still a psychotherapist by trade. I guess I've done it for, over 20 years now. But I consider myself a bit more these days an online trainer and a speaker. And I have written a program over the last couple of years called The Voyage, which is an online trauma recovery healing program, really. And at the moment, I am training coaches and counselors and therapists and mental health practitioners in The Voyage. But the end game, or the dream, I suppose, is to get it out to the general public, because lots of reasons. I think, firstly, I was privileged enough, I think, to have a little bit of money left on my own mental health journey. And I mean, everything went into it, but I did have access to funds. And in my time in mental health, I have worked with people who do have access to therapy. But my heart, I guess, goes out to anybody that doesn't, that doesn't have access to treatment, to what I think I have. I mean, I don't know where I'd be, Johnny, if I hadn't got some help at points in my life. It got pretty dark. So I guess the dream, or who I'm about now, is about campaigning government, is about getting the Voyage out there to the general public at some point at an affordable and an accessible rate, so that other people can benefit, from what we've been lucky enough to be given, or had to really search for, some of the answers in our own lives. So I think that's who I'm becoming. That's my next decade or two of work. I like to think, or hope.
I cannot think of anyone better. People are struggling.
Oh,
They are struggling with money. They are struggling with illness. They are struggling with just getting the bins out.
yeah.
Just getting the bins out. Just doing the school run. Just like they're terrified about the way their kids are being educated. They're terrified about all of the new rules coming in, the taxes, the increase in food prices. Like I say, illness. And then we've got all these other things being thrown in, like global warming and things like that. And then you have prime ministers as such coming out and telling everybody on national television or wherever that, is it really that bad, of mental health crisis, and do they need to get into work? And I'm just like, this is not going anywhere good. So I feel like you've literally just offered a solution to everything that chap went out and said the other day.
And it would be, and everything, I hear you on everything that you've just said, and I think that's what keeps me up, thinking about. I am grateful that to have had the education and done the work that I've done. Now, how do we pay it back? And when I'm saying affordable and accessible, for the Voyage, for me, for the general public, access to something like £10 a week, and the government put in £10 a week, because some of the fundamental kind of bedrocks of our mental health are knowing about how we operate, and the mind and the body work, and our nervous systems, and how trauma, and a dysregulated nervous system and what we believe about ourselves impacts our world and life. So there are 12 waves of the Voyage that really do take people on a journey of changing how they view themselves and their world and their lives. And it is starting with coaches and counsellors, but I can't wait for it to get out there at like £97 a month, and get whoever's in government to say, yes, we'll pay half, or we'll put money towards this, because we should be teaching people all of this far earlier on as well, like to teenagers and in schools. And
absolutely,
why are we not learning all of this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I speak to so many different people. I go into schools and I talk about sort of very simple topics with people, and I always hear the same thing. Why is this not taught in schools? People don't know how to identify, just on a base level, people do not know how to identify the emotion they are experiencing.
Yeah.
It gets misdiagnosed all the time, therefore they make decisions based off of that misdiagnosis, self-diagnosis, whatever. And before you know it, you're in a whole kettle of fish, and what option have you got left to do but blame yourself? Which is not helpful.
Or the government that blames you, right?
But exactly, that's what I mean. It's then supported by your environment, which is really tough. So I love hearing that, and I've had a strong belief for a long time. And I hear a lot of people saying that they want to have purpose, they want to have fulfillment, they want to be happy. But I think as a base level, for me, and this is just my view, mental health, having good mental health, is about creating stability. Some people just want to know that the ground below them is solid, and I think that starts with truth. I think that starts with learning to acknowledge and accept what is true. Whether you like it or not is something separate, but at least the truth doesn't change all the time, every day. Depending on who you talk to, it's always true, whether you like it or not. So I think that should be applied, but people don't know that. People don't know, and it's exactly as you just said, people don't have the education. It's not taught in this thing we call school or universities or colleges. There's not even an additional option to learn it, on the side, you know. So
Yeah.
I would love to see that happen, and I
Yeah.
absolutely think that you're the person for the job. So I'm happy to hear that.
Thank you. I think what comes up for me when you just said that is about the first phase of the voyage is to land in the sand, and then we swim in the sea, and then we soar in the sky. Those are the three phases. And, it is a mind, body, and dare I say, soul perspective on life too, because, we're not as simple as just our minds or just our bodies. We are all three, and we've got to kind of look at every area, I think, of a human being to really look at holistic treatment. But that landing in the sand, for me, the first stage, the truth is, who is the I? Who am I? Because I think
Yes.
we get very confused that we think that we don't really, or we lose sight of who we really are. So there's something about finding out who the I self is. When I refer to myself as I, that maybe I'm not my wounded parts, although we all have wounded parts of us with limiting beliefs and, low self-esteem or lacking in confidence or the trauma. And we also all have critical and sabotage and adapted parts of us, who can be like stroppy teenagers. But I will say they're not the I. That's
Yeah.
not the I self. So we're not identifying with them, we're not abandoning them, we're not rejecting them, but we're just recognizing that we need to stabilize in the adult first and kind of educate people that they are so much more than they believe that they are, really deep down underneath their wounding.
Yeah, that's there's never been anything more true than that. I mean, we are told who we are more often than we decide,
Yeah.
and there's many ways that can happen, and some are deliberate and some are undeliberate. You know, I always try to be as compassionate and as empathetic as I can be. You know, I've had trauma in my life, and I've had things happen to me. My father was abusive, and I was subjected to a lot of different types of torture and things like that.
Yes.
However, when I look at my mother, who was doing her best, did she do a 100% cracking job? No, but she was not in a position to.
Yeah.
And now, as I'm a parent, I recognize how hard it is. It's very, very difficult, and we
Yeah.
all try our best. And it's not about us saying that we need to become perfect parents. It's about being able to open up conversations about our flaws, about things we can do better. You know, to be able to hear each other. And this, I think, is part of the problem. We live in a society that's divided. We are divided, and I come across this thing which I'm going to use next time I go to schools. And it was this wonderful notion, right, that you can go into and this is what my intention is to go into a room for the children and offer them balloons. Give them balloons, get them to blow them up, get them to write their name on them, and then get them to play with the balloons and mix them all up in the room. And then I'm going to ask them to find their balloon. And they're probably going to struggle to do that because it's all been mixed up in the room and they're not going to be able to find it. But then I'm going to stop them after a few seconds, and I'm going to ask them to just pick up any balloon and give it to the person that's names on it. And I read this somewhere on social or in a book or something like that. And the idea is that when we search for our own happiness, that we will struggle to find it. But if
Yeah.
we look to make others happy, then we will find happiness in ourselves.
Yeah.
Because when you give that balloon to that person, I'm positive, I can see it in my mind's eye, then kids are going to be thrilled to be able to give that balloon to somebody else, and it's going to make the person happy and make them happy, you know. And I think a lot of the time that we are told to segregate, we're separated, and we're told we're not to talk, basically, not to
Yeah.
communicate, you know, everything's getting
Yeah.
shut down. And I think that what you're doing is talking about knowing who you are so you feel confident to mix with others and to be confident in those situations, and to listen more than we talk,
Yeah.
maybe, I don't know.
Yes.
I love that. And I'm excited to see what you do. I'm always watching all the time. That sounded a bit creepy.
Oh.
Sorry.
No, no, no,
Don't need to sound creepy.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it.
Lots of people will know you for your work around trauma. So I'm going to start with saying, asking, how would you explain what trauma is and how can it impact us during our lives? I know it's a big question. Go anywhere you want with that.
I might start with what trauma isn't, because I think trauma gets such a bad rap. And I think that really we need to do a bit of PR around the word trauma. If it was a public relations nightmare, it would be that word. honestly, for what it brings up for people, and so many different things. So, we can over egg it. Trauma is not having a bad hair day. That is not traumatic. Sometimes I think it gets a bad rap because people feel it's used for things that are kind of everyday events.
Huh.
And obviously it's not that. But I think that trauma is very much underreported, because if I say that trauma is chronic stress or it's a dysregulated nervous system, I think that's far more in my mind what trauma actually is. And the confusion often, Johnny, lies where somebody thinks that trauma is like a one-off event, like a tsunami or a war or a rape or something that is obviously traumatic. And it's not. That is what I call a type 1 trauma, an aspect of trauma, but it's not the whole trauma. So they miss out the other 3 parts of trauma. So yes, there is the obvious aspect 1 traumas, but aspect 2, which is not understood and is underreported, I think, is that early lack of attunement or lack of co-regulation or lack of mirroring by our primary caregivers.
Mm-hmm.
So it's when the child or the baby or the infant or the toddler or the teenager really too doesn't feel safe in some way. So they don't feel that they're heard or they're listened to or they're seen or that they're regulated. So a parent's really primary job, and I'm sorry to any parents listening, because obviously, like you, it's the hardest job in the world, right? And we are never blaming parents. We're just trying to say, how do we break the patterns that then go on? Is the parent's primary job is as a tuner or regulator to their child's early nervous system. So they are the scaffold, if you like, emotionally. And how a parent does that is by attuning emotionally to their child and watching their emotions and being there for them. But obviously by being regulated themselves. So if our parents were using or drinking or drugging or rageaholics or workaholics or anyaholics, they wouldn't have been able to soothe and attune to their own nervous system. So they wouldn't have been able to do it for us. And that is the biggest kind of trauma that I see ending up at my door, is somebody that cannot self-regulate. They can't self-soothe because they haven't been co-regulated with or soothed. So that's an aspect 2, trauma. And then a 3 is, unfortunately, what we call a parental introject. So if mum and dad were scared of aeroplanes or mice, or they hadn't done any work on their own trauma, sometimes that can get projected into the child or the young person. And then, as if that weren't enough, sorry to anybody listening, they're probably already going, oh my God. We've got an aspect 4, which is the intergenerational, so the grandparents and beyond, but it's also the soup that we grew up in, the schooling, it's the friendship group, it's the society, the collective, the community, who was around us. Did we grow up with racism, sexism, homophobia, poverty? All of that is trauma. Did we grow up in a war zone? Or, did we grow up never knowing where our next meal was going to come from? Or bullied by people? So that to me is what trauma is. And it's all of those aspects. And part of the work, and I'm sure you do too, is how do we break the cycles so that we become, in our generation, the transitional characters, so that we don't pass it then down to the next generations and the next and the next. I'm not going to make it too political, of course, but when you see what's happening in the world and what's on the news and what's going on, I weep a lot of nights watching how that intergenerational trauma and collective trauma is just being passed down into all of those children that are suffering so badly.
Yeah, that's one of the best explanations for trauma I think I've ever heard. I'm going to sort of summarize. So trauma can come in four ways. One is in an event, maybe
Yeah.
an injury, an illness, some sort of natural disaster, something like that. Another way it can come is feeling unsafe and dysregulated, whatever environment you're in or whatever you're subjected to. Another one is a projection of fears, perhaps someone else, other people's fears about life. Like you say, spiders, you see that all the time. That's a really good analogy.
Yeah.
And then there's the generational beliefs that we have and how they, and because they can be very limiting for you moving forward as well. So you could have, you know, number one, an event, and then have the generational belief that you can't get past the event. That's just the way it is. We're taught to accept that that's the way it is, you know. So you can see how they can work together and almost sabotage each other in a way.
They do, because people often don't have trauma just in one aspect. They have it mostly, a lot of them, in all of it. And then the most important thing is that trauma isn't necessarily what happened to you either, it's what didn't happen. So it's the absence of something, it's the neglect of something.
And the meaning that you attach to it, I suppose, you know, which might not even be an accurate description of what happened. It's just what you believed in that moment, that meaning that you apply to it. When I cry, mum doesn't come, it's that type of thing, you know.
Exactly, because all children are what we call egocentric, and it doesn't mean that they're egotists. It means that when we are children, we make everything mean something about us. We can't make it mean anything about the parents, because then life would be too scary and untenable. So them behaving like that towards me has got to make it mean something about me.
Then you're talking about like the reason why you might, or reasons that you might be experiencing trauma. I was talking to a client the other day, and I was trying to get them to understand an aspect of trauma, and I use this analogy, which I think I'm going to use in my book that I'm writing, because I like to try and find really simplistic ways of explaining it. And you might be able to pull me up on it. It might need altering slightly. It'd be interesting to see what you think. But you know, I described it as, imagine you're driving your car, you've got your seat warmer on, you've got your hot coffee, you've got your favourite songs on, you've got a nice clear road, and it's a lovely, beautiful day. Everything is okay, you are okay. And you're driving down the road, everything's cool, and you hit a pothole. And in that first instance, you're confident you can sort this out. There's not a big problem. You've hit a pothole, you're okay. But then very quickly, you realise you're out of control of the vehicle. You are no longer in control. There is no action you can take. There is nothing you can do. You're out of control, and you are now scared. And every decision you make in that moment is based off of that fear. It's based off of that incident that's happened. You have an impact, and in that impact, people get hurt, things get damaged, and ultimately you're now living in the aftermath of that. Imagine waking up in the morning, everything's okay, and you get a text message, or you're scrolling on social, or somebody says something to you, or open a letter. Something happens that triggers you. Let's say you hit a pothole. That pothole is significant. Maybe you have the emotion of rejection, and your original pothole or trauma that you had is rejection based, and now you're having this feeling of rejection, and now you're out of control, and you're saying things. And we all have the moments, right, where we're saying and doing stuff, and you're like, I can't stop myself. I'm out. And that's not the time to maybe implement at all. Maybe it's time just to get the heck out of there and distance yourself from the situation. And what I was trying to sort of get across is that, what does that offer you? Well, it offers you the opportunity to look out for potholes and to have tools, because you can't change what happened, and you can't always avoid or not engage in things that trigger you. So what can we do? We can look out for them. Or what could you do if you're driving your car? Well, you can slow down. You can go around a pothole. You can report the pothole and get it filled in. You can do lots of things. But what I hope it offers is, all of a sudden it gives you an option, and it stops you from getting to that out of control moment where there is nothing you can do. And when I say that, that's not me trying to take away autonomy. I'm not saying you should say, oh, it's not my fault because I'm traumatized. I'm saying it gives an understanding of what's happening. So we not avoid that area, but we can prepare for it in the best way that we possibly can, instead of finding ourselves in this spot where we're actually destroying our lives, and we know we're doing it, but we can't stop. How does that sound?
I think it's brilliant. I think it's brilliant. I think it's a very good analogy. It's funny, when you were talking about, entering the pothole, the cup of coffee was going everywhere, and it was in my imagination. I'd already spilt. I think where I go, obviously, is I have a similar analogy to you, but it's not a pothole.
I'm happy with that. It means I think a little bit like you. I'm pleased
You
with
know,
that.
I feel very chuffed too that you should say that. So I think you're right, and the analogy that I use is very similar, but it's that there are treasure chests at the bottom of the ocean. It's got to be right because it's a voyage.
Say
So
more.
I've got
Say more. I like this.
the sea in some way. So I think that we get activated, all of us, by our limiting beliefs, that most of which are from our childhood years. I think we get activated by memories, and I think we get activated by felt sense and triggers in the body. And they, to me, are like treasure chests at the bottom of the ocean. What we need to do is, I sometimes call them that it's not very PC maybe, but like the belief bombs that are going off. So there you are, and you're swimming away and all the rest of it. And then suddenly the
Wow.
water gets all choppy and the waves start to, and it's like,
Wow.
and we're normally okay if one belief gets activated at once. But if we've got two or three belief bombs going off at once, we feel like we're either drowning or we dissociate and we go back onto dry land.
Yeah. Wow.
So the way to deal with the activation is a bit like yours, is to become a really good swimmer and learn how to ride the waves. Because I think all of it, maybe I'm generalizing a bit too much. I have to be careful when I say all of something or nothing of something. I'm trying to find a middle path. A lot of what I've seen within myself and within clients over the years is that we get very fearful of the somatic system, of the body, of the waves. So, the second phase of the voyage is, let's get really good at swimming. Let's go back into the ocean. You've got a co-swimmer with you now who can get you to breathe and feel things and all the rest of it. And then when you're a good swimmer and we've got our oxygen tanks on, let's dive down and see if we can diffuse those bombs.
I love it. Absolutely love that. When you said about the bombs going off and being in water, I actually felt the fear. I was like, that sounds terrifying. That sounds absolutely terrifying, because I actually nearly drowned in Bondi once. So,
did you?
Yeah, so that for me has the layers.
How old were you when you nearly drowned? Because I nearly drowned too.
I was in my 20s. My wife and I, we went for a little sandbank thing where everybody was, and then before we realised it, we were really far away. And the bit about that's most traumatizing is that I could feel the sandbank with my foot. I just couldn't get to it, and I was swimming as hard as I could, and my wife was too. And I said to her, "Baby, you're all right." And she's like, "I can't swim anymore." And I put my hand up, and we got rescued by some 14-year-old boy on a paddleboard. Well, I'll take it, whatever. But the bit that really got me was afterwards. My wife looked at me. She went, and I said, "Are you okay?" She said, "Yeah." She goes, "I knew you'd save us." And I was like, I wasn't going to be able to say. I love that she thought that, but it scared the life out of me, because I'm like, I was drowning too. Like, we were both drowning. Like, there was nothing I could do. Like, I was utterly helpless, and it was a horrible emotion. Helplessness is a difficult emotion anyway, by definition, because there is no sort of solution in that moment.
No.
Yeah.
Thank God you did get to the end, and you did get rescued and saved. And you're here to tell the blooming story.
Night after night, I woke up after that. But I mean, do you share what happened to you, or not really?
Well, no. I mean, I'm fine. I mean, I was 6.
Oh man, 6.
Yeah,
Really
I
young.
was 6. Yeah, in Italy, and suddenly walking along, and I couldn't swim, and literally, I just went through a sandbank, similar thing, and I was with my sister, who was 2.5 years older, but she couldn't swim well enough to save me.
Oh man.
So I was going under and under and under, and then some 6'4" strapping Italian lifeguard came in and pulled me out, and they got me on the beach and resuscitated me and all the rest of it. And the funny part of the story is that I met him 20 years later.
No.
On the beach. Yeah, he was
by mistake.
No,
Oh, no,
no.
no. Oh,
I knew I was on the same beach as, I'd
yeah,
nearly
yeah,
drowned. And
yeah.
so we knew his name and everything. So we asked all the beach guys, does so and so still? And he did. I think he
Wow.
must have been in his 20s when he saved me, and he was in his 40s or 50s when I met
Did
him.
he remember?
Yeah, he did.
That's
He remembered.
incredible.
Yeah, yeah, he remembered.
Oh
So
my
yeah,
gosh.
yeah,
That's a crazy story.
yeah,
That's amazing.
yeah.
Wow. What a
But
thing
yeah,
to do. I bet that was emotional for you. Blimey.
yeah, yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, yeah, it was. And he was still, a hero in my eyes, because he rescued me.
Yeah.
So I think, I was probably nearly gone.
Blimey.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
That's
Has it
something
put
to.
you off water though? Are you okay with water now?
I've never been the same in the sea since.
Yeah.
It was that feeling that I was a pro wrestler at the time, and I was out in Australia wrestling. So I was young and strong, and all those different things, and it just made me realize. I don't know if I'd maybe coming to think of it, thinking about how helpless I felt as a child. And I built myself up to be this big, strong wrestler, and I found
Yeah.
myself in a situation where it didn't matter how strong I was,
Mm.
and it didn't
Yeah.
matter what I did. I wasn't in control here. The sea was,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then obviously there's the whole thing about drowning. It's not a nice thing at all. But
No.
wow, we
Uh,
share a lot in common. It comes to
we
it
do
seems to
share a
come
lot.
to.
And
Um,
it's funny, the ocean represents for many people the kind of unconscious and fears and all the rest of it, because, yeah, it is diving into the body. And I think when we have trauma and we've been through trauma, we have those hypo-arousal states as well as the hyper-arousal states. And the hypo-arousal states, which is maybe where parts of our child selves still have a bit to process, are kind of helpless, hopeless, powerless, and all of those things, which are really difficult to feel.
they are, and most of the time I think they sit firmly in that sort of primary emotion state, and it doesn't surprise me at all that we might opt for a secondary emotion instead,
Yeah.
and decide, yeah, okay, this emotion about an event, no thank you, can't. I don't feel powerless in that, helpless in that. I'm going to be frustrated instead. I'm going to be frustrated instead, because that way I can throw stuff. It feels like I'm doing something. It's an emotion about an emotion, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
But the
Yeah.
thing is, I don't know if you can process that, because
Well,
for me it feels secular. It feels like you're always going to come back to the same thing, whereas I think if you can get to that primary emotion, and maybe in some cases all you can do is get to a place of acceptance with it, like something bad happened to me, it's not who I am, and I don't know, it depends what it is, I suppose.
I think it's interesting because I think that we're always dealing with the reverberations
Yeah.
or what's being activated in the bottom of the ocean. We're all dealing with it all the time. I think that there are various ways of diving down, and yes, acceptance of those feelings and emotions and what happened to us is absolutely a primary place that we need to get to at some point. But I also know when I take people down, and it does normally feel like I'm like, oh, here's a torchlight, and don't worry, I'm with you. And I know it feels dark and scary and horrible, but just keep breathing. You're okay. We've got our oxygen tanks on. Normally what happens for me is that emotion that's kind of there will want to come up,
Yeah.
and if we can stay with the sadness or stay with the shame or stay with the fear and just let it kind of fizz and percolate, we're releasing whatever that belief is. We're kind of allowing the treasure chest to close the lid without
Yeah.
all of that stuff reverberating up all the time.
Your analogy is spot on, though. The sea's got so many things. Like, you could think that's a sea monster and only find out that it's
Yeah.
not. It's like sometimes
No,
when
fish
you
are friends. Fish
well,
are
yeah,
friends.
yeah, and I see it all the time. People that make enemies of of parts of themselves, and they talk to themselves in these horrible ways. When I used to be a PT, I used to ask people, what's driving your decision to lose weight, and they would say, I hate myself. And I'm like, okay, that's actually your motivation for this. And when it gets hard, I hate myself, it's not going to help you. It's not, you know. So where can we get to? Am I going to ask you to love yourself? Well, I think that's probably a bit unrealistic. If you've been practicing for 30 years that you hate yourself, overnight you're going to just love yourself. That's not going to work, probably. But how about we get to know ourselves a bit more? How about we get to know a bit about what we do and don't like, instead of adopting other people's preferences and believing that they're our values when they're not, they're just someone else's preferences, you know. So
And it's sad, isn't it? Because it's the adapted kind of critical part that comes out from the wounded part that isn't the true self. So it's our adapted or critical part that hates on the child because it blames the child for everything. And so we've got to stop that war within somebody between their, you know, pissed off, irritated, angry, upset, sometimes aggressive, teenage, critical parent, internalized part, beating up on their poor child.
yeah, man, you take over that job. Yeah.
They've taken over that job, and there is no adult self in the middle going to the adapted teenager. Hang on, stop beating up on that part of you. Like, it's not their fault. It was never their fault. Like, come on. And what they hate too is they hate the body, because it's almost like the parts live in the body.
Yeah,
So
man.
the body is always to blame. And it's like, no. We've got to befriend the parts, and we've got to befriend the body. And we've got to get your adult back on board that starts to accept your younger parts, whether they're adapted and pissed off and critical, or they're tiny and they're young and they're frozen and they're scared.
Yeah. I mean, I'm so fascinated by the concept of inner child work and shadow work and stuff. I find that when I discuss it with men, that it's a real turn off for them when I say inner child. There's an eye rolling that goes on, but and they don't really understand it as a concept. But you know, I say to them, like, look, see how your child is trying to get your attention, and if you don't listen, they start to misbehave. I said, let's just take that as a tiny little snapshot of what could be going on with you. You know, like, you know, you're not, and the point is, we make enemies of that part of ourselves. We dislike that. We cause conflict. We create tension when we could just listen. But I don't like what it's got to say. Well, that's okay. You know, that's okay, because again, we're dealing with truth, aren't we? I had an experience when I was writing my book, right? And I was writing a bit about, I said to myself, I was just going to write about some of my experiences as a kid, some of the traumatic events and what I've drawn from them through therapy. And I made that sort of promise to myself that in writing it, I'm not definitely going to put it in the book. I just needed to do it. And I had this really funny experience because I've spoke about it and I've intellectualized it in therapy. But when I started writing about it, oh my God, like I was sat in that moment, and what happened was I sat and it was a really therapeutic moment for me, because when I read it back, there were parts of it that didn't make sense. And I was like, how interesting. And that's when I adopted the concept that we think that our memories are like little movies that we play back, but actually they're more like canvases that we continue to paint over. And it's like, when I looked at it like that, I was like, okay, where have I changed this a little bit? Not a lot, just subtly. And what would have been the reason I did that? Well, I think the reason I did that was because that thing was so horrible that I trying to make it a bit nicer for me to think about, for me to talk about. And what happened in that moment is I realized I had created these narratives that I could accept so that I could function. But in essence, and I don't love the word, but it makes sense, it's a lie. And then I'm wondering why this house is falling down all the time. Well, it's built on sand. You know, so it was an interesting experience. It really was, to do that. I'm not sure I could recommend it, but it was definitely
no. It's quite an interesting thing to do. And you know, the narrative that we tell ourselves, I guess what's coming up for me is, what is the story that I'm telling from my present moment self, my adult self? And what is the story coming from the child or the adapted parts? Like, how does the story change depending on what version of myself that I'm in?
Yes. Yeah, because that must make a difference, right? Like if you
Yeah,
revisit a memory in a good frame of mind, it might not seem so bad. If you look at it in a bad frame of mind, it might seem twice as bad or worse than
yeah,
it's ever seemed. I get that. That's interesting
yeah.
because it
But
definitely stopped me from writing for a little while.
yeah, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. And I also think you're right. The narrative changes as we develop and we grow. And I think as we accept ourselves and our parts even more, the story changes even more.
And the context as well, having children,
Yeah.
I go from, you know why did my dad do the things he did as a child, say, to then becoming a parent, holding my son, falling in love, and then wondering how could he do this, like how, like
Yeah.
I can't imagine anyone, like the idea of it makes me feel sick, like the things that
Yeah.
he did and the idea that I could do that to my son is, I don't get it. But that's part of, I watched that Baby Reindeer. I don't know if you've seen it on Netflix, and I've had a lot of people ask me, like, why was he doing this, why was he doing that? And I was saying, look, emotions don't necessarily follow logic, they just do emotions. And I don't know why he did the things he did. I'm not him, but I would imagine he had a need to feel somewhere. I don't know if you've seen it or not.
I started to watch it and I found it actually too difficult to
It's
watch.
hard, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
it's actually one of the most hardest things I've ever had to watch,
Yeah,
actually.
and I might go back to it, but I think that I did find it really hard to watch. And I think that sometimes parts of us need to be needed.
Yeah, man, that's a really good analogy of it. And I
Yeah,
just want to say to anybody listening, like, if you do choose to watch Baby Reindeer, please do your research first, because
yeah,
it is legitimately is quite a traumatic show to watch.
yeah,
And there's bit
yeah,
parts of it that will take you by surprise. So yeah, do your research first if
yeah.
you.
I think I don't know how far down I've got. I don't know whether I got to the really, really traumatic parts. I already thought, yeah, I'm gonna come back to this at a later
Do
stage.
you know
Yeah,
what really shocked me was the chap, the main actor. He actually wrote that's about him.
yeah,
And I found that incredible. And I watched an interview of him, and he said that, it was his way of taking back his trauma, or taking back ownership of his life. And I don't know, me personally, I'm quite admire that. I think that's a very brave
yeah,
thing to do,
yeah. I
and
do
makes
too.
sense. And to act it
Yeah,
out as well. I mean, my goodness,
yeah.
it
I
makes me
mean,
shiver.
well, I don't know whether, as you say, writing it, being in it, whether we're speaking about it, whether we're putting it in a book. If you'd said to me 10 years ago that I would share my psychosis breakdown and my addiction and everything on a stage, I'd have gone, no. And then the story changed, and then I shared more intimate parts of my trauma and I would never ever have thought I would ever do that. But if it's in service to the audience and it's going to help somebody out there by listening to it, I'm personally willing to do anything pretty much to help somebody else.
Yeah, I feel a very similar way. When you recognise the impact that your words are having, it's a powerful moment, especially for someone who's consistently working through their own trauma. So
I
yeah,
think it's ongoing work, and
it
I,
is.
I have to say to people, we are all works in progress, and we're all on a journey of continuous becoming. And I don't actually think that there is this dream final destination.
There's the fault, isn't it? There's the fault.
Yeah,
And I kind of learned that when I recently climbed a mountain, and I was struggling, and I got to the top finally after making the decision to keep going. And I thought I'd reached the end of my journey, and then someone said, "Right, we got to go back down." And I was like, "Oh," and it never
yeah,
stops. I was like, "Right, cool, there you go." That is trauma, isn't it? It's like, "Hey, we've
yeah,
done it. We've got to the top. We understand it. Now what? Well, we got to go back down again." It's kind of trying to be a playful, but at the same time, it was like, "Oh wow, okay."
but the problem is that nobody wants to hear that bit. That's
Not at
the
the
problem.
beginning. I don't know if I would have gone to the top if I'd thought about it. Like,
Yeah, about halfway through, I think I said to myself, "Oh my God, I wish I didn't know now what I know. I think I'd rather be in oblivion." But I mean, that was only just a moment. It
Yeah,
was only a moment.
it's in them hard points, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's really difficult. I would say that the work's worth doing. I endeavour to, as I'm sure you do, I show up for people, and especially my kids. I remember an occasion once before I'd really got into the deeper work where we were all sat on the sofa in the living room watching a Disney film, and my son nuzzled into me for a cuddle, and I literally was just like, it doesn't make sense, you know. And if he ever listens to it, I love your cuddles, but I was just there, and it was just this moment of like just utter uncomfortableness, and I'm like, this is not okay, man. Something needs to change here for you, Johnny. You know,
Yeah.
there's more work to do. You know what? That was after was it after I got sober? I think it was after I got sober, and that's when
Yeah.
you know I found that becoming sober was what opened my eyes to, okay, now I can do the work, you know. And it's like, you know, all of a sudden I realized, oh, okay, now I know why I was drunk, because otherwise I'd
Yeah.
just be doing this without alcohol.
Exactly. We've got to put down the band-aids or the swimming bands or the life raft at some point to be able to dive down. I often say to people, you know, you might not be able to do that at the beginning of the journey. You know, let's stabilize you a bit. Let's give you some psychoeducation. Let's get your adult on board before we take away all of the armbands. But if you want to do the deeper trauma healing and work, you can't do it with armbands on. And any form of self-soothing that happens outside of ourselves, like alcohol or drugs or anything else, it's a no-no, really.
Yeah. I mean, even if you use your analogy of the ocean, you can't dive with armbands on.
No, you can't
You can't.
dive.
You can't dive with armbands,
Yeah,
and you might
and you
need to.
can't learn how to be a bloody good swimmer, can you, either?
Well, no, because you've always got the crutch, right? You know,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think it's a good way of looking at it. Like, we self-medicate, right? Whether it's antidepressants, whether it's drugs, whether it's sex, whether it's gambling, whatever. When you break your leg, you get given a crutch because your leg isn't fully functional. And the
Yes.
idea is that you do some sort of rehab whilst you're on the crutches, and the crutches are there to support you during that rehab. The thing is, if we just use the crutches and we don't do the rehab, then the leg doesn't get better. Just like with us, right? Like, you know,
Yeah.
we can self-medicate all day long, but if we don't do the rehab, which is the work, the therapy, the counseling, whatever, then the leg's never going to get strong. You're never going to get strong. You're never going to learn the tools and the adaptations that you might need to make in your life. So I think you've got such a strong analogy. I love it. Absolutely love it. I really do. And
Yeah.
analogies are important because they help people understand, which is ultimately what we're trying to do, right? Is educate.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know?
we are. So you've got to put down the crutches eventually and build the leg strength up, but at the right time and with the right rehab and with the right help and with the right information too.
You got to find
Because
someone you trust.
there's a lot of tosh out there.
Truth. It's unfortunate, but it is true. And there's a lot of
People
toxic.
say, give me 7 days or 7 hours or 7 minutes and I can, you know, I'm
Yeah.
like,
As soon as I see someone taking ownership of someone else's recovery or healing, I'm like, red flag,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
it's it's like you say, it's ongoing. So what are you working with that? Because it's also the case that there are people that work with me at different stages, and I'm not going to tell you that every part of your journey requires me. That's not true. You know? There are things that other people are completely, utterly better at with that support, and that's exactly where they should go. You know, exactly where they should go. You know, and I recognize that. And sometimes they're like, oh, but I like working with you. Listen, I'm not never going to see you again. I'm just saying that, you know, you can go and do this, you can go and do that. And I look at it as a reward. When somebody doesn't feel they need me anymore, that makes me happy, man. We've done good work in that sense.
I agree.
Crap
I
business
agree.
model, but that's not what it's about. I got one question before we sort of come to an end. This has gone so fast, and that's just more of a curiosity, really. But what emotion do you tend to avoid or dislike having the most?
I think it's always been for me anger. And that's really because I think one of the things, I was going to say the thing I've most struggled with, but I think one of the things that I've most struggled with, this term isn't liked by lots of people in my profession anymore, but I'm going to use it, was codependency and believing that it was my job to look after everybody else and people please and be the nice one and, you know, hide my needs and wants and to never be angry. Codependents are never angry. You know, when you get into recovery from codependency, I think it takes a while for that feeling of anger to come back. And when it does, it's quite difficult to sit with and hold. And I also find that with clients, anger has been the harder emotion that I've had to work my way around sitting with and being with, particularly male anger. And I feel like I'm really good with it now. I feel like I can really sit with it now.
What do you do?
I take a very deep breath or two and really ground myself and really kind of know that if it's coming at me, that it's not intended for me. You know, that it's somebody's adapted self and that they're angry for a reason, because I'm definitely of the mindset that no emotion is a bad emotion. All emotions are allowed, accepted, and clients, etc. Please be angry with me, because I am going to piss you off at some point, right?
But ask a hard question, right?
Yeah. And actually, for some people, when they do get angry with me, I go, yippee, internally. We've passed a bit of a, hurdle for them, potentially.
I love that you said that, because I think about it, right? And I think, imagine you're angry, right? And I look at you and I say, calm down, stop being so angry, right? But yet people are doing that to themselves all the time and then wondering why they're perpetuating the anger. Because they're telling themselves, oh, I'm not angry, or I shouldn't be angry. The fact is, the emotion will happen. Whether you want it to happen or not, it will be there. And if you can deny it all day long, all you're doing is creating a conflict that's just going to attach itself beautifully to this anger or this frustration or whatever it is. I love that you gave that as an explanation, And
as coaches and counsellors and professionals and all the rest of it, our use of breath is really important, because when they're experiencing strong emotions, just for us to take a breath in the right place can really, really make a difference. It really can. And also, I see anger very often as the racket or the secondary emotion, as you were saying earlier, because I know that there is some need or boundary violation or something happening for this person, and it could be current, but it's probably historical. And if I can get underneath that anger, what is the not okay child part really feeling?
Love it. Yeah. And let's face it, anger in many cases creates clarity. It's very rare that I meet someone who's angry and doesn't know why. and actually sometimes it's there to give you that energy to put that boundary back in place and say, well, oh, hang on a minute, mate. No, and you do need that. You need that a little bit. You need that assertiveness. You need that business kind of look to you. Otherwise people will just push you aside,
Yeah, and walk all over you. And I think that for me, I need assertiveness more in my life, and I definitely need a bit of the fuel of that anger to go, actually, I really want to campaign now about people's mental health. Like, people should not be on year-long waiting lists. We shouldn't have people being turned away by the NHS. Like, what is going on that so many people can't access treatment?
And this is it. You hit the nail on the head. And for if you just take the last 5 years alone, everything that has happened on a macro and micro level in people's lives, all the things we'll never know about people, but all the things that we've all shared together, like the pandemic, just a small thing, the pandemic, like, and all of the repercussions and all of the financial stuff. Like, come on, man. Like, of course we all feel like this. Of course we do, because it doesn't seem to ever end, No. And it's that's draining. That's keeping our cortisol like popped up all the time. Like, I stopped watching the news now. I don't bother anymore, because I like to be informed, but I have my sources that I dip in and out of, but I really try not to get pulled into everything and anything that's happening, because there's no autonomy there, which is always going to create frustration for me. I don't know why people are behaving the way they are when they're supposed to be leaders. Doesn't make sense to me.
They're not trauma informed.
No,
they've got no trauma informedness. And actually, I am going to try and get into government with a trauma informed workshop.
Love it. Do it.
I really am.
Yeah.
Because we need to be coming from that perspective with people.
We do.
particularly as leaders. Like, leaders need it more than anybody else. If not, they're just ricocheting between their own wounded parts and their own adapted critical parent. And that's what we're seeing. And it's just crazy.
It is. And you see it in some characters way stronger than you do in others, right?
Yeah. Where are the adults? And also, where is the collective safety?
Oh, if you look at it like that, like even if you take the four things you said at the beginning, so you have an event like a pandemic, and then you've got people feeling unsafe and dysregulated. You've got fear being projected through the news with death tolls going up and all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And then you've got generational beliefs that nothing's going to change.
Yeah.
So you kind of throw it all together. This is, God, you're blowing my mind.
But we're in a bit of a trauma soup at the moment, and I think that we need some pretty trauma-informed adults and leaders and government and collectives to pull us out of it. So I'm not even going to mention Trump and America.
It was on the tip of my tongue, and I thought, I don't think you want to talk about Trump. The one thing I noticed that all these leaders don't do consistently is they don't listen, and they run with the assumption that they know what's best for other people. Now, if you take that and you apply that to can you even imagine the disaster we would create if we genuinely believed that we knew what was best for the person sat in front of us? That would not end well.
That is narcissism run riot, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, it is.
And, power and control. And unfortunately, it seems to bring in those type of characters and figures. And I'm still this is terribly un-PC, but I'm still curious about why we don't psychologically test people before they get into Parliament.
Do you know what? I'd never thought of that. Yeah, what a great question. I mean, people do that for jobs as CEO of like Coca-Cola, but they won't do it for a country. That's an interesting notion. I never thought of that. But I just got one last question. I ask it to everybody. Is there anything that you'd like to pass along to listeners that you think could help them with their self-development?
There's a couple of things. The first sentence that came up for me was keep at it. Just keep at it. We're talking about mountains. We're talking about voyages. We're talking about, there might feel like there are many mountains to cross, but as Johnny and I said, each one that you climb will give your legs more solidity, more muscle, more strength. And it's not straightforward. It's really zigzagging all the way. And keep the faith, I guess. Keep the faith, keep at it, keep the faith, keep going, and keep asking for help.
Wow. I think that's one of the best ones I've heard, I think. Yeah. I remember watching my little boy learn to walk. What he did more than he walked was he fell over.
Yeah.
But he didn't stop. He didn't just go, oh, that's it then, walking's not for me. Yeah. He kept walking. And then now he's running, playing rugby, and it's terrifying. But
how many failures do we need? How many falls? How many setbacks till we actually break through? I don't know. No. I'll tell you when I've got there.
Okay, I'm going to schedule you back on. What do you reckon? 2-3 years? Right. Well, listen, this has been, honestly, it's been made my day, and I'm really appreciative of your time. But just before we go, is there anything that you're working on or you'd like to tell people about, but just before you go, anything you want to draw their attention to?
I think I've probably banged on rather a lot about the voyage, but if it resonates with you or anything about the mission or what I'm trying to do, please get in touch.
Yeah, where would they start? Is there a website?
Yeah, there's thevoyageacademy.com, and at the moment I'm teaching clinics and rehabs in it, and coaches, counsellors, mental health practitioners, therapists. But once I've trained enough coaches and clinicians in it, the next stage is the general public. So it's not going to be long.
Keep watching this space, man.
You can help in any way, anybody, watching or listening. Or if you work in government, then we might have put them off, Johnny.
Well, yeah, I'll be some careful editing just for them. And I'll send them a very adapted version of this. But I genuinely, honestly, mate, thank you so much for your time. This has just been fabulous, and I've learned a lot, and I've just appreciated all your stories and just everything. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
I really hope it's helpful for anybody that's listening.
Oh, no doubt.